The creation of Bob Kane with Bill Finger, Batman is probably the most popular solo superhero with the public, with the possible exception of the web slinger. If you ask someone why they like Batman, they'll probably say something along the lines of, he has no superpowers. That very reason is why we have so many films starring Batman. Without superpowers, he's insanely versatile. You could have a heightened reality with cosmic forces and actual superheroes and gods, and Batman fits pretty easily in there. He also works really well in more grounded detective stories. To date, I've seen 38 of his films. Part of the reason I wanted to do this list is because I don't really see many people talk about a lot of his animated efforts alongside the live-action ones. While the live-action efforts have certainly had more exposure, a lot of the animated ones hold up pretty well in quality against most of those. So, like most lists, I feel as though I should define what counts as a Batman film for this list. Rule number 1, Batman must have a starring role. Now, that might seem like a given, but if I didn't make that distinction, I'd have to include films that center on supporting characters like Joker, Birds of Prey, Suicide Squad, Catwoman, and it just feels dishonest of me to call those Batman films. Rule number 2, Batman can share the spotlight with another character. This rules in several efforts that include characters like Robin, Mr. Freeze, Harley Quinn, and most notably Superman. So things like Dawn of Justice count as Batman films to me. And finally, it can't be an ensemble film. Some people might include both versions of Justice League from the DCEU on their lists, but if I did that, I'd have to include films like The Flashpoint Paradox, Throne of Atlantis, Justice League Dark, Crisis on Two Earths, and I'd rather make it easier on myself. There are several films that meet these requirements that you won't see here. As big a fan as I am of the character, I've only seen so many of the films. And so that's why you won't see things like the direct-to-video Lego films, the 1940s serials, or the series of Batman Unlimited films. To make it easier on you, the viewer, I'm also including the year of release for the film, as some of these films share similar titles. Strap yourselves in.
It's going to be a long night.
Folks, I didn't really think it was possible to like a Batman film less than the next entry on this list, but my goodness, this one is unbelievable. I felt dirty watching this film. The adult content is horribly forced in, some of the vocal performances are really terrible, it's such a nothing story that I wonder why it's worth telling, and I'm baffled as to why you would use the animated series style on this story. It adds nothing to my appreciation of the film. If anything, it feels like it's a skid mark on the legacy of that great show. I would almost go so far as to say there is no redeeming value in this film for me, and it very nearly makes my worst films of all time list. Despite some really well put together apologist arguments that I've encountered, I can't disagree with the masses on this one. This film is bad. It's almost legendary for the number of things it does that make no sense or are cringeworthy. For me, the biggest reason it's towards the bottom of the list is because it fails at nearly everything it tries. As a comedy, it's too inane to be hilarious. As an action movie, it's dull. As a Batman movie, it misses the point of the character so entirely that I wonder if people may have thought they were making an Austin Powers film instead. There are two reasons it inches above the previous entry. First, Uma Thurman is actually bearable to watch at times, and I could have seen her do the role in a better film. Second, Michael Gough turns in what is possibly his best performance as Alfred. Other than that, it's as bad as everyone remembers. If you think it's so bad it's good, I envy you. For me, it's just almost the worst kind of bad. I truly believe that some films are made for certain audiences, and sometimes that makes sense. I'm not a fan of anime, never have been, and thus the experience of watching this film was pretty hard. Part of the reason is that I've never found an anime art style that has appealed to me, and sometimes I feel like the genre pushes for visual spectacle over story logic. That's fine, but it's not the type of film I want to watch. Despite an impressive voice cast and a great start, it quickly goes downhill for me. If Batman villains using robots with houses built on top of them to fight each other sounds like your cup of crazy, then by all means. For everyone else, I'd say hard pass. I don't think anyone wants to go into a film hating it, especially one featuring two of the most iconic heroes. So I don't revel in the fact that I really don't like this film. I want to love it. I've seen this film more times than most movies I like, but the contradictions upon contradictions in the plot are too much for me to turn my brain off and just enjoy this film like I do plenty of other efforts on this list. The film has some powerful and thought-provoking questions to ask. It has an inspired look for Batman and fantastic performances. However, it feels like it's taking one step forward and then two steps back. Some actions taken here are based on some of the dumbest logic I have ever seen in superhero movies. Everything about Doomsday and Lex Luthor is confusing to me, and some performances are really odd when mixed in with the others. Looking at you again, Lex. It's really easy for me to imagine a wonderful film based on this material and this aesthetic, and I want it so badly. However, every time I watch this film, I feel like I find something else that just makes it worse. And no, the Ultimate Edition doesn't help, which by the way is the only version I watch now. There's a lot to like about this film, but like the previous entry, every good thing is marred by something else that's worse. Tommy Lee Jones makes for my least favorite Batman villain. His campy take on Two-Face is so wrong and painful to watch that I want to phantom edit the film so that he's nowhere to be found. Chase Meridian is so cringy and near insulting to me as a love interest. Finally, Robin starts so far into jerkface territory that I find him pretty irredeemable throughout. There are some good things here. I like Schumacher's style of visuals. Val Kilmer is a decent choice for Bruce Wayne. I like the idea of examining why Bruce became Batman. And while Jim Carrey is just being Jim Carrey, that kind of works with the Riddler. The reason this is above BVS is its story makes more sense to me. That's right, I find Riddler's mind-sucking device more plausible than the logic behind the Lex plot to get Batman and Superman to fight. This film kicked off a line of solo Batman efforts inside of an animated shared universe, and thankfully, all the follow-ups are better than this first effort. It's such a boring and humdrum film that I find no reason to return to it. I've never cared for the voice cast, so it's not like I can get excited about any characters here. The film doesn't take advantage of the dramatic possibilities that Damian Wayne brings to the table. And he's such an obnoxious and insufferable brat that I just want Batman to use his ejector seat in the Batmobile and be rid of him. It feels like such a by-the-numbers and manufactured film that I feel like a robot watching this film. I guess you could call this a vanilla ice cream kind of movie. It's so basic, there's nothing in it that you can't find that's done better in another movie. Full disclosure, I've never particularly cared for Year One, and so a direct-to-video adaptation of that story does nothing for me. The reason to watch the film is Bryan Cranston as Jim Gordon. However, the intercutting between his and Batman's story feels more haphazard than it did in the book. Ben McKenzie makes for one of my least favorite portrayals as Batman, and the few things that I like were done better in a live-action film I saw first. If you like the novel, maybe you'll get something out of this. However, most of the people that I've heard from that did read the novel Don't have much to comment about this film, so take that for what it's worth. I honestly wonder why this wasn't just a motion comic rather than a full-length animated film. Let's be honest, this one barely qualifies as a Batman film. But since I'm counting its predecessor, I feel like it's only fair to include this one too. The idea of Superman and Batman being surrogate parents to a Kryptonian daughter is fascinating, but that's not really what this film is about. It's a Supergirl origin story masquerading as a Superman-Batman film. Superman gets a bit more to do in this one. Darkseid and Wonder Woman are nice additions, and some of the fight scenes are fun, but it feels like all this is a slugfest film. While the action can be nice, the underlying story feels pretty generic and doesn't make great use of all of its characters, especially Batman. You can either take or leave this film, but I generally don't care enough to want to watch this when I've got so many other options to get my Batman fix. One of the most recent entries into the Batman Rogues Gallery is the Court of Owls, and some of the great visuals from that original story are preserved here. But the whole thing feels rather underbaked. Damian is still fairly obnoxious, the titular fight is unsatisfying, and I never sympathize with Damian through the whole story, which makes the ending feel rather empty. I do like the moments where Batman tries to bond with his son, and I like the treatment of the owls, but this is overall a subpar movie to me that scratches just enough of the Batman itch to not be a waste of time. It's kind of a shame that the follow-up to Mask of the Phantasm ends up this low on the list. However, it's because the film feels like it was created in reverse. The ending is the best part and feels like the reason the film exists. It's beautiful and it's touching, but everything backwards from that starts to get worse for me. I don't care for Kunak. Batman is barely a character in this, to the point where he feels like Dick and Barbara's third wheel. And the scenario with the blood type that was concocted to get Barbara into the story is laughably unbelievable. It's not unwatchable, but it's nothing special either. Gotham by Gaslight has a great atmosphere and fun ideas. However, the transition from the original novel to the screen is understandably a little troubled. I'm actually somewhat okay with the new twist on the villain here. I like Selina's role in this, and it's great to have Bruce Greenwood back as Batman. However, the film lacks energy, and thus feels a bit dull. Plus, the way they get the three main Robins into the story feels pretty forced and groan-worthy. Honestly, it feels more like a story for Sherlock Holmes than Batman, and Batman is not Sherlock Holmes, which means that some of the potential of the location and the idea is a bit wasted. There are a few fun reinterpretations of some characters and locations, and they serve to make this film a little more interesting to watch than some of the others. Honestly, this is a film more about the Bat family than about Bruce Wayne. Things I like, though. I really like Yvonne Strahovski as Batwoman. Luke Fox is a fun presence. The action's pretty good, and I like Dick and Damian working together. However, I have big issues with the way the story handles Talia and her plot, and because that's the driving force of the whole movie, it taints my enjoyment of the film. It does continue the story from Batman vs. Robin, so you can't really skip it, but thankfully I did enjoy it more than its predecessors. This is a pretty iconic film, as it was the introduction for a lot of people to Batman, and more specifically to Adam West's version of the character. It was for me too. It was the only part of that show that was available on home media until 2014. It's a shame, because the more I sample of both that show and the animated films that followed, the more ambivalent I grow to this film. It's not nearly as clever, it's poorly paced, and it shoves the popular villains into a plot that doesn't need them all. The performances are a lot of fun though, and there are a lot of small laugh-out-loud bits. However, most of the time I'm just lazily watching the film and it's not really grabbing my attention. It's a good attempt at translating the show into film, but there are better examples of that to come. Like Superman, Batman, Apocalypse, Public Enemies mostly exists for action and spectacle. I'm more won over by the fun characters that appear in this story, and both of our protagonists actually get something to do. Plus, the political commentary at the beginning is really interesting to me. Once we get to the kryptonite meteor threat, the film loses any attention it had to plot and themes and just throws fun action our way. That's disappointing, but I can't say I hate the experience afterwards. I wish some of the things that were thrown in for the film to get a PG-13 rating were taken out because they feel really unnecessary. And I feel a bit of whiplash when Lex calls Amanda Waller the B-word, and shortly afterwards we have Superman-Batman robots. It's got little substance, so this feels like the equivalent of a light snack of a film. I'm not the biggest fan of Alan Moore written works. Honestly, I sometimes question if I shouldn't just send this film straight to the bottom of the list, just on principle how it treats women, which, to be fair, is a problem the original story had as well. The Killing Joke section of the film is actually done really well, but yeah, the first 30 minutes drag this down hard. However, if I just look at the second part on its own, it's a fine enough story. Like Year One, I never particularly cared for the original story. Unlike that film, I think this one actually helped me to understand why more people really like the book. Mark Hamill also thrives at certain points, and I love Kevin Conroy's performance in this film. But the Batgirl's story at the beginning can't really be separated from the rest of the film, and feels like a cancerous tumor that the film did not need. Assault on Arkham is a Suicide Squad film masquerading as a Batman film. But at least he's not totally wasted here like he was in Superman, Batman, Apocalypse. The film is set in the same universe as the Arkham video games, which is my favorite version of the Batman character, and thus some of the great voice casts from those games show up here too. Troy Baker was a fine replacement for Mark Hamill in Arkham Origins, and he does a great job here too. The Suicide Squad banter is a lot of fun, and I particularly enjoyed Deadshot here. The whole story kind of feels pointless though. And a bit like Batman and Harley Quinn, I'm not sure why the tie-in to an established universe was chosen. Plus, not bringing back Wally Wingert to voice the Riddler or Tara Strong to voice Harley Quinn is really awkward given how much this feels like it wants to be a part of those games and how much of the cast is carried over from those games. In fact, not hiring Wally Wingert feels like a crime worthy of being thrown into Arkham for me. It's an okay Suicide Squad movie, but it's not a great Batman film. Jeff Loeb Batman stories are often cited as some of the best that the Caped Crusader ever had, but he tends to rely on a similar twist for all of his books. Hush is often cited as the weakest of them, and part of that is the actual mystery itself. This film actually fixes that and makes it a real mystery. And it retains the Batman-Catwoman romance, which is one of my favorite parts of that book. It does lose some of the fun villain cameos, the excellent final scene that Batman had with the Riddler is gone, and the final confrontation leaves a lot to be desired. It's also not the art style of Jim Lee, which is a bummer. However, enough of the good stuff from the novel remains in the translation that I can safely recommend this to fans of the Bat. Okay, last one of these that is masquerading as a Batman film, I promise. I'm still unsure what to make of with this film. As a Batman film, it's a poor example. It's not really interested in the character, and I don't particularly like the ending. As a one-off martial arts film, it's fairly entertaining. The fights are really fun, I really like the choice of DC characters to pair up with Batman, and I like the stakes at play here. I admire the creators for wanting to do something different, and they mostly succeed. But I really wish that Warner Brothers would stop with the false advertising on these films. For all the love that's given to the DCAU, I don't hear too many people talk about this film. I'm not entirely sure why. I enjoyed the film well enough. I thought the mystery was fairly well done. I liked the new cast of characters. This is one of the better uses of Bane in the DCAU, which is notorious for not handling Bane well. And I'm also kind of in love with the song played at the Iceberg Lounge. However, this is a bit like Sub-Zero in that this probably works better as a set of episodes rather than a feature-length film. It's also kind of a shame that this was the last of the solo DCAU Batman films until Batman Harley Quinn, and we all know how well that one went over. The first animated Batman film I ever owned, this one goes all over the list for me. Sometimes it's way higher on the list, other times it's down towards the bottom, and sometimes it's towards the middle. The last time, I liked it just fine. Several of the animation styles, especially the ones in Field Test and Have I Got a Story for You, are ones I really don't like looking at. Plus, the underlying story that connects all of the shorts is really thin and pretty weak. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't notice any connecting tissue between the shorts the first go around. And also, for the third time on this list, we come across a film where I'm not sure why it had to be set in an established universe. In this case, the Nolan films. There are some great visuals here. I think Working Through Pain is a terrific short story for Batman, and Conroy delivers another fantastic performance. I really like the idea of an anthology film for Batman, and none of the shorts are truly painful to sit through, so I think this one's worth checking out. The Batman series in the mid-2000s is not one that I've had a whole lot of experience with. I've seen a couple of episodes, so I don't know if this film is a good representation of that show overall. If it is, I ought to give the show a chance. This is a really solid take on a Batman-Dracula encounter, of which there's actually been quite a few. It's got some thematic storytelling chops, Peter Stormare is really great, and there are some haunting visuals here. The Penguin as a sidekick feels a little out of place to me. It's a little too cartoony. And I question why Bruce would be pursuing a relationship with Vicky Vale during an event that makes him question his own humanity. But I really think that this one shouldn't be overlooked. I was pleasantly surprised with it, and a bit disappointed not to see more films from this team, like the follow-up film they wanted to do with Hush. A common complaint about the Burton-Schumacher Batman films is that they were always more interested in the villains. And this is the film I think of when I hear that complaint. Batman's even less of a character here than he was in the '89 film. And it's clear we are meant to sympathize to some degree with the Penguin and Catwoman. Danny DeVito does a great job of portraying the Penguin, even if the script is ultimately pretty confused about his endgame. Christopher Walken is always good, and he doesn't disappoint here. Plus, it's got a great visual style that feels like an extension of some of the elements from the '89 film. My biggest problem here is Catwoman. This is a personal gripe, and I know Michelle Pfeiffer is a really popular choice for Best Catwoman, but I hate how insane she is and how much I don't understand about her character, especially the 9 lives running gag. The Catwoman that I like is a thief who is duplicitous in order to serve her own purposes, but she really has a heart of gold underneath. She's actually a good person, but doesn't know how to be one without serving her own ends. That's technically what we have on the page here, but with this direction and this performance, I'm not convinced this Catwoman is a good person, and she feels like more of a standard Tim Burton, Forever Alone, Disturbed type of character than a reinterpretation of Catwoman. Because of that, and some of the very unnecessary vulgarity in this one, I can't rank it too high. It's a bit of a misguided effort for me, but it is an unforgettable film either way. As with another film you'll see later on this list, I'm counting two-part releases as one film. A solid Batman story, this film understands what's great about the book and retains the best bits. It's a film about Gotham City, and while Batman isn't the only protagonist, his physical presence is punctuated by the shadow of his influence in the other scenes, like with Harvey Dent or Jim Gordon. It's a great mystery, and like Batman Hush, it takes the opportunity to fix parts of the original story, and thus actually turns it into a mystery. Jensen Ackles already did a great job at portraying a villain/anti-hero in another Batman film, and so I was surprised how much I liked his version of The Dark Knight here. The Long Halloween is also my favorite Harvey Dent story, so it's great to see it treated with some reverence here. This is supposed to be part of a new animated shared universe with Superman Man of Tomorrow and Justice Society World War II, both wonderful efforts in their own right. And if that turns out to be the case, I can't wait for more adventures from this team. I first saw this film after I had already seen The Dark Knight, and because I was introduced to the darker incarnations of Batman through the Nolan films, this one was so stylistically different that I kind of hated it on first watch. Over the years, I've really warmed up to this film, and I now get why some people absolutely love this film. I do have some issues with Batman's portrayal. I also have a problem with the handling of the origin, and a lot of the third act makes no sense to me. But I love how this feels like a classic mobster movie in a lot of ways. Jack Nicholson deserves a lot of credit for the film, and while he isn't my favorite version of the Joker, it was absolutely the right move to focus on him. Some elements, especially the Prince music, feel pretty dated and underwhelming, though I think part of that is because we've had so many different films afterward that offered different interpretations of the character, and some of those are closer to what I want from Batman. This was the film that made the entire rest of the list possible, and thank goodness it made the impression that it did and really elevated superhero movies. Batman vs. Two-Face contains Adam West's final performance of the character, and it's a pretty great tribute to him. While I like the first film quite a bit more, I don't think this one should be overlooked. The idea of casting William Shatner as Harvey Dent is a genius move, and it makes me so sad that this was not considered while the original series was in production. I really love how the mystery plays out in this film, and it's pretty funny. My favorite moment is the recreation of the famous Batman slapping Robin panel. Some of the villains feel a bit shoehorned in, the plot can't help but feel a little stretched out, and it can't help but feel like a little bit of a letdown after the first film. But I'm so glad that Adam West got one last great Batman film to go out on. Okay, this one's a bit of a cheat, but I first saw this as an edited standalone film, and it was one of my first exposures to either animated series, and so I'm counting it. Besides, it's a really great story. It's wonderfully understated in its parallels between the title characters, and it's so fun in its action. This feels like classic Batman and Superman to me. The Joker-Lex team-up is obvious, but Mark Hamill and Clancy Brown are so much fun together that I don't care. Plus, I never would have considered comparing Harley Quinn and Mercy Graves. The film's a great example of style over substance. That's not to say that there is no substance here, there's actually quite a bit, but the reason it's so high on the list is because everything is so competently done that I can't complain. This is my wife's favorite Batman film, actually. I took her to see it in the theater because we both really liked the Lego Movie. And we were in an audience of mostly young kids and their moms, but no one was laughing harder than I was. The first 15 minutes are absolutely brilliant, and sometimes I just go and watch that bit of the film. However, when I do go on with the rest of the film, I'm treated to something pretty solid. Batman has a fine arc here. I really like the choice of Rosario Dawson as Barbara Gordon, and some of the meta commentary this film makes about the character and the industry is both funny and thought-provoking. The climax and the shoving in of the villains from the Phantom Zone are the only points that I don't feel like match the rest of the film in quality, and I'm a little lukewarm on Zach Galifianakis as Joker. It's a great tribute to the Batman character, and it's also one of the few great family-friendly Batman films. This is another film that had to grow on me. Batman the Animated Series is almost legendary for its influence amongst animated TV shows. And so it's a given that there would be some theatrical experiences based on that. I did get to see this in a theater recently, and while I had some issues with the transfer that I saw, it more than justified its existence as a big screen experience. The mystery here is the best we've seen from an animated Batman film. Andrea Beaumont might be my second favorite love interest of Batman's, and I really like the handling of the flashbacks. I have a few issues with the role the Joker plays in this story, but I can mostly put those to the side and enjoy Mark's great performance. It's a great sampler of what the TV show did so well, and it does stack up with some of the best episodes of that show. I don't think anybody expected much when this film was announced, and yet this turned out to be my favorite Batman comedy. Part of the reason that I love it so much is it feels so authentically of the world of Adam West's Batman, and yet it takes the opportunity to comment on the darker material that has come afterwards that shaped our current perception of Batman. It's also hysterical. It proves it understands the rules of the 66 show and employs them in very creative ways, such as Batman always wins, the villain scheme can't be any more ambitious ultimately than just plain robbery, Chief O'Hara is an idiot. Julie Newmar unfortunately delivers a poor performance, and there are a few jokes that don't quite play for me, and the length is a little bit of an issue. The climax feels a little drawn out. Regardless, this absolutely needs to be checked out both by diehard Batman fans and perhaps even people that don't even like Batman. You ever have that film that is so entertaining to you that even though it's a hugely problematic film, you can't help but love it? I absolutely agree with a lot of the issues that people tend to lob at this film. Bruce getting back into Gotham with no one noticing, a lot of what Bane says is null and void after the big reveal, the editing cheats around the bomb. However, this is my list, and despite these issues, it's massively entertaining to me. I'm fascinated by it, and it's probably the film of the trilogy I am most likely to put in if I want to watch a Nolan Batman film. Bane is fantastic in both look and performance, even if he's overshadowed by the poor follow-up in the last 15 minutes. Anne Hathaway makes for my favorite on-screen Catwoman. The backbreak fight is near perfection for me, and I really love the setup portion of this film. The moment where Batman rides in on the bike is one of my favorite moments in all of Batman media, and I can't stop smiling during that scene. This is a very problematic film, but it's also a hugely entertaining film. I don't think anybody was asking for yet another Batman reboot, especially after BVS. They either wanted to just hang up the cape and cowl and be done with him for a while, or they wanted the Ben Affleck solo film. I have to admit, I was kind of hoping for a solo Affleck film, but I'm ultimately so glad that we got this as a consolation prize instead. The film reminds me a lot of my reaction to Citizen Kane. It's a film I deeply admire, and it gets a little bit better every time I see it. We finally get a live-action detective film for Batman. I love his relationships with Jim Gordon and Selina Kyle. Colin Farrell's Penguin is a joy to me. That car chase is amazing. The main musical theme grows on you like crazy, and I love a lot of the commentary this film makes on current social issues. The main thing that holds it back is its length. It's approaching 3 hours, and so it's a film I feel like I have to be invested in and can't just put in for simple entertainment. I also don't like the final scene at Arkham. It feels very obvious and trite, especially after Batman Begins. All that said, this feels like a potentially definitive cinematic take on the character, and I can't wait to see what else Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson brings us from this universe. From here on out, we start into the absolute top tier of Batman films for me. Shocking absolutely no one, The Dark Knight Returns is my favorite comic book story of the character, and I didn't think it could be translated well to screen, especially after seeing what a lot of this team did with Batman Year One. However, the film proves that it understands the novel so well that it can safely make the transition from page to screen. That's a rare feat. They take their time with it. It's 2.5 hours, and most every major part of the book is represented in some form or another, and they keep the substance from the book. The major pitfall for me when watching this film is Peter Weller's vocal performance. I can't say that there's anything wrong with the performance, it just doesn't match this design for me. It's a little too high-pitched, and it lacks in the true power and grit that I feel like this character should have. In case you're curious, I'm much more a fan of the Michael Ironside performance from the animated series. If someone like Ironside had voiced Batman for this film, this would be the clear winner of an adaptation from a graphic novel to screen. Dual protagonist stories are really hard to accomplish, especially for someone taking over the mantle from a hero that is so iconic. The idea of Terry McGinnis, a high school Batman, feels really silly, and yet if you watch this film or the original series, he justifies himself as a worthy successor to the mantle. He handles things differently. He's not Bruce Wayne, and yet he fully understands the mission of the Bat. And I kinda love that. I also love the mystery here. I love how it answers some of the lingering questions from Bruce's time in the suit. And like Mask of the Phantasm, it's a great sampler of its parent show. My main issue here is that the flashback is a little too good. It kind of overshadows the rest of the story because it's frankly provocative in depicting a final confrontation between the original Batman and the Joker. Overall, the film is a fantastic one and one of the absolute best in the franchise. In the mid-2000s, the superhero films were very much in their nascence. And a lot of them started to become very formulaic because every first film of a character needed to be an origin story, and that can be really tedious. Take a look at something like the 2005 Fantastic Four film, where they take so long to do the origin and they spend so little time actually superheroing that we don't get true superhero action until the third act. Thus, it feels like we just wasted a whole bunch of time before we got what we actually came to see. That is, of course, unless there's an actual story tied to the origin that runs throughout the film. Batman Begins is one of the best examples of an origin story put on film, and it remains my favorite version of that story in any medium. That's partly because it doesn't feel like a traditional superhero film. It feels like the story of a man who is motivated by his parents' death and the injustice around him to become a symbol. It has some cliche superhero tropes that it's almost too good for. The one major female in the film being a love interest, the final act's action sequence, the tumbler chase scene, but most of those elements are done pretty well for the most part. If this is all Nolan ever did with the character, he'd still have something to be proud of and would have made the best live-action Batman film. However, this one is an insanely popular choice for the best animated Batman film, and as you can see, it's the highest one on my list. Although it's a totally new vocal cast, I never once missed Kevin Conroy or Mark Hamill. Bruce Greenwood and John DiMaggio make the roles their own. Jensen Ackles is the perfect choice for Jason Todd, and I love the poignancy of this story. It's a thoughtful look into Batman's character that leads us to question how we would respond if one of our great failures came back to haunt us. Resurrection stories in superhero fiction are rarely interesting to me, but this is a major exception because the point isn't how the dead character came back to life. The point is to question Batman's methods and his whole crusade. While Batman at the end says, this doesn't change anything at all, it absolutely does for the audience and helps us to understand why he's such an endlessly fascinating character. I would say on the level of such literary classics as Sherlock Holmes or Dracula or Don Quixote. My only real issue is that Amazo does feel a little out of place to me here, but that's it. This is one of the rare examples of a film being better than the book it was based on. The legendary sequel that triumphed over the original. The Dark Knight, along with Iron Man, made superheroes cool again. Currently, I see a lot of internet critics saying it's overrated and that Heath Ledger is the only memorable thing in this film. I respectfully have to disagree. The Dark Knight is a model sequel and a great companion piece to Batman Begins because it's a continuation of the idea of a symbol shaking people out of apathy. It's a film about Batman's influence, and it examines both the negative and positive repercussions of that. Harvey Dent is such a great personification of this that when he is scarred and twisted by the Joker, the film becomes a tragedy with echoes of a Shakespearean tale. It's also a wonderful crime drama about escalation and how evil will fight back just as hard, and this is personified by multiple fascinating characters. Furthermore, the film intelligently finds a way to explore all these big ideas without Batman constantly being on screen. The reason I think Heath Ledger is still talked about with this film is because it's a true-to-form reinvention of the Joker, and his worldview is fascinating. To borrow a phrase from another YouTuber, Ledger is printing cinematic gold with every scene and thus threatens to overshadow the rest of the film. However, I really think the rest of the film is also fantastic, at least on par with Batman Begins. And I'm in the camp of feeling like this was robbed of a Best Picture nod at the Oscars that year. For my money, we have yet to have a Batman film to outrank it. Now, this is a ridiculously long video, but as you can see, there are so many different interpretations of the character, and yet surprisingly, there are still several flavors we have yet to see. Each person has their own view of what Batman is, what his rogues gallery should be, what his allies are, and how grounded the universe should feel. I imagine that even after we have 50 different films with the character, there will still be fans dissatisfied because their definitive take on the character wouldn't have been realized quite yet. Some films have gotten really close for me as depicting the definitive version of the character, especially Under the Red Hood, The Batman, or The Dark Knight Returns. I expect that the character won't be leaving our screens anytime soon, and I thank you for joining me on this long video discussing what I think about his cinematic adventures so far. You can rest assured that somewhere over the rooftops of Gotham, the Dark Avenger of the Night still prowls around, utilizing the superstitions and fears of criminals to stop crimes like the one that took his parents, in order to provide the world with a time where he no longer needs to exist.